Welcome back to another episode of Comply or Die. Slightly different scenery today, hopefully just as exciting and captivating for the audience. Today, an in-person, very special guest we have, Tracy, a lawyer by trade and a data privacy expert.
Yes, correct.
Thank you firstly for joining us today on another episode. For the viewers today, the angle we'll be taking around this one is to talk a little bit around some of the data privacy laws, regulations. What are the challenges companies are facing? And really just to get to know Tracy a little bit more. So starting at that one, again, welcome and thank you. Tracy, tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I guess I got into the game about 15 years ago when I was studying my law degree. Facebook and Twitter and all of those things were front of mind. I guess if I think about it, I started on Facebook when I was 16 years old. And I didn't know that any of the data I was putting on Facebook at the time had any relevance to my current life, or that I was just freely giving away personal information about myself because I was a teenager and I knew no better. So I told everybody all my personal information. And then when I was in university, I started thinking about your data privacy rights. And I basically got into the game because I wrote a dissertation paper on your rights to privacy in the recruitment process, just because I know a lot of employers are looking you up on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, X now it's called, and they may be finding out things about you that you didn't necessarily want your employer to know. So you could be indirectly discriminated against if you're a mother, for instance. On Facebook, you can see if somebody's got 3 children or not. And then I think it was also just scary to think about at the time how few of us thought about what we were putting online could actually have an impact on us in the real world. That's where I started. And then I started researching POPI or POPIA. The GDPR wasn't even in existence yet. I started researching that, and then I decided to do my articles in it. And I started my articles the year that the GDPR was enacted. And I've been doing it ever since. So I live and breathe data privacy, basically.
And as you say in all of this, I'm sitting here going, yep, how much of my personal information have I given away on Facebook?
Exactly.
And I'm sure millions and millions of people have done. That's always really exciting. And now you find yourself in a legal role, in a compliance business, delivering SaaS. What does that look like on a day-to-day for you at the moment?
I think it's really interesting because now we moved into the SaaS environment, into the startup environment. I think one of the most impressive things at the moment is the amazing tech that I've been exposed to. So every day I'm speaking to clients and I'm like, wow, that is the most amazing app or tech that I've ever seen. I mean, the other day I was speaking to someone where they can scan your face. Don't worry, it's not facial recognition tech, but they can actually give you a health score of how healthy you are or not just by scanning your face. And I just thought, we are definitely living in the future. So I think that's what's been the most fun and exciting part of my new role here is the amazing tech. Generally, they are processes. So if you know the GDPR, you've got your controllers and your processes. So generally, I would say our clients are more processes. It's been very exciting, the tech.
Very cool. And an angle from a SaaS perspective and tech, are you seeing, if there is an easy answer for it, is it easier or more difficult for people to comply with these regulations with such advancements in tech that either they're developing or that they're using for their products?
I mean, it all depends. I'm going to give you the typical lawyer answer. It depends. So it all depends on the type of personal data, personal information that you're processing. So, if you've got a lot of health data, credit information, biometric data, location, all of that. It depends how intrusive your application is with your SaaS product. It's not that intrusive, it's pretty easy to comply. What I have found is that quite a lot of our clients are obviously coming through the SOC 2 ISO process. And if you're not processing a huge amount of personal information, just the basics, name, surname, address, if you're coming through that process and you've done your SOC 2 or your ISO, then I feel like it's actually quite an easy process for you. Just because one of the main principles of GDPR is security. And you can already tick that bubble. You can say, yes, I've done all the security aspects if I've done my compliance with SOC 2 and ISO. But like I said, some people are using health information. Quite a lot of AI is starting to come up. And I think that's where it obviously becomes more challenging.
And from the challenges side tied into that, how much leeway or room to play with is there in terms of interpretation of the different laws and regulations? Are they as clear cut as saying this is what a requirement is and you have to abide by that? Or are there ways and means where you might not have that specific process, but there's other ways that will address the same thing and you can still be compliant?
So, very interesting question. So that's, I think, what makes the GDPR such an interesting law is that it's principle-based legislation. So generally, we're so used to laws that are very black and white. So they say you can do this and you can't do that.
Yep.
They're easy to follow. So even like your SOC 2s, your auditing type of things, they're easy to follow, and there's defined controls. Yes, no, it's a tick box exercise. The GDPR has come along and said, okay, this is principle-based. So you need to do what is reasonable in the circumstance to comply. So that's why I said it depends on the type of personal data that you're processing. If it's health information, credits, race information, anything like that, then you obviously need to be doing a lot more to protect that data. If you're processing names, surnames, work emails, then you need to do a lot less. So there's quite a lot of room to play.
Okay. I mean, that's really cool. And going back to the points about the whole ISO side. So I mean, for the viewers, for anyone watching by trade, as you've picked up, we both sit in the compliance world. I deal a lot more with the tech side of compliance or the SOC 2 and ISOs. Tracy deals with all the privacy side of things. And tying that together, exactly like you've already started going into doing a SOC, and I suppose maybe even really easily having a scope or including privacy in that, and then expanding that to an ISO to then be able to add onto your list of certifications, to add in your GDPR or something like that. Do you see a lot more customers going for that these days?
I think so. I think one of the main things, in especially if you're in the European market, if you are speaking to your customers or your suppliers, I think one of the first questions people are asking is, are you GDPR compliant? Are you SOC 2 compliant, ISO compliant? Are you GDPR compliant? And I see that's, I think, where a lot of customers are putting their focus now, is that once they've done their SOC 2 and completed their ISO, now they're thinking about, okay, but what do I need to do to be GDPR compliant? Because at the end of the day, get you more business.
Yeah.
It's really important. But I mean, I will say there is a caveat there. You can't just say, tick all these boxes and say, hey, I'm GDPR compliant. It's definitely a journey. And I like to compare it to physical exercise. So, if you want to, remain physically fit, you have to always exercise 3 to 4 times a week, let's say. You just have to keep up with your physical exercise. And it's unfortunately the same with GDPR. It's not like you do these 20 things and never think about GDPR ever again. You just constantly need to do it within your business, just like physical exercise, to remain compliant. I mean, also think about every time you're adding new tech to your business. Now you need to think about, okay, well, how am I going to use this new tech, but also comply with GDPR? So it's just an ongoing process.
Sure. I mean, it's a really cool analogy. And like you say, you do see that very much. It's a lot easier for a customer that's going for their SOC 2 attestation, because they know the end goal is there's going to be an audit, and an external auditor is either going to say yes, good or bad. Whereas you're going to claim your GDPR compliance and then face a really big fine or penalty at the end of it. And the case in point that you made about that business value is a competitive edge, isn't it? Exactly like you said. If you've got 5 companies and one has no compliance and someone's got SOC, ISO, and GDPR, it's a nice differentiator. And in terms of that journey, like you said, maintaining your physical fitness around GDPR, once you've done it for the first time, obviously you can't give me your it depends again.
I can't give you that.
To keep that going on a daily, monthly, annual basis, is it in a situation, an easy example, where a company is doing similar processing, it's not really changing too much, easy enough to maintain by following decent practices, or is it quite a big challenge?
That's where cultural change really comes into play. So I always tell clients, at the beginning of your journey of your physical fitness, you're very unfit. So you need to climb a mountain. So it's going to be challenging. And yes, I would say in like your first years, it's pretty challenging. Especially in jurisdictions where you haven't really had to do privacy law before. So South Africa is a pretty good example. We never had privacy laws up until, was it 2020, it only came in. So it's more challenging in a South African jurisdiction. Whereas in various countries in Europe, Germany, for instance, they've always had very strong and very strict privacy laws. So when the GDPR came in, it wasn't so difficult. But I think for most companies, you could probably expect your first year to be pretty challenging. And then once you get your team on board, you get a very good cultural change. Everybody just knows about GDPR and they think, okay, you know, back of my mind, I need to remember the GDPR, I need to remember good security practices. And then once that happens, then I do think it does become easier to maintain. And then suddenly you decide, okay, we're putting in all this new tech, and then you need to obviously start from scratch and then start thinking about privacy by design.
Okay. And do you want to elaborate a little bit more on privacy by design? Do that one in there just so you could have another topic.
So privacy by design is basically, if you're starting out on a project, you need to think about, okay, well, how can I build GDPR into this from the beginning so you don't build this entire tech and then have to go backwards and then put privacy functions in there. So let's say you could maybe put like, okay, we're collecting this data, but then maybe, automatic processes to delete data after a year or two, whatever it is, or making sure, okay, we're not collecting any special categories of data. I mean, keeping our data limited. So yeah, that's basically privacy by design. So some of the clients that I've consulted with recently, that's actually been front of mind from a storage perspective, because they're storing heaps of personal data. And I've been saying, okay, well, let's think about privacy by design so that GDPR becomes easier.
Sure. And I suppose, from the storage, but the design side as well, it's somewhat tricky in some cases, because if you've got a customer, and again, as the legal side, and you probably ticks when you say they want to get it done as quickly as possible. And that balancing act between saying, okay, we're going to get GDPR compliance or GDPR ready before that stage, and then we're going to work on adding things in, and that balancing act of, okay, do we spend an extra 3 months and it's built into the business process versus how much money we'll lose? I suppose there probably isn't a very good answer for that in itself.
It's one of those, it depends. Once again, it all depends, I think, on the clients. And, maybe they have a customer who really wants to be GDPR compliant as quick as possible. Then, yes, you need to think about, okay, well, what is our critical areas that we need to ensure we are compliant with? But I think if you're building a massive SaaS product and you're in the beginning stages, you might as well think about privacy by design from the start, because then you've got your bases covered.
Sure. And even thinking about another framework, me looking back more on like an ISO project, that you're going to be assessed, this is where you are now, and that's where you want to end up. Privacy by design, adding that in the whole time, it isn't something or a function that should be separate, and a business has done their security compliance and now you're doing your GDPR. It all does sort of become the organization's function as a whole, doing stuff on a daily basis.
Yes, 100%. So yeah, and like if you do everything together as a holistic approach, then, for clients and for your reputation and for, gaining new customers, you've got all those compliance aspects, which I think is great.
And looking forward, or looking where we are now, and I know this is a tricky one, you're talking about new regulations that are coming into play, the amount of data that's available out there. How are you seeing that sort of factor in? Is it going to make things a whole lot more complicated again? Cannot say, it depends.
Try not to.
What's excited you about that, I suppose?
Well, talking about new regulations, I think one of the most exciting ones that is coming apparently in June is the EU AI Privacy Act. I think that's a really exciting regulation. And I feel like last year's buzzword was AI. It was just absolutely everywhere. And the law always takes a while to catch up. So you'll see technology rushes ahead. Same with data privacy. We got all these social networks taking all our personal information, and then the law wakes up one day and goes, we need to do something about that. We need to regulate it. And the same now with AI. But I feel like AI, it's coming along quite fast, the EU regulations. But what absolutely completely baffles my mind, I don't have the right answer right now, is that for AI models to work, you need huge amounts of data. You need big data. We need to feed it with the big data to train the models. And I don't know, sure there's so much personal information sitting within those models, and I just don't know how they GDPR compliant. So I think that's, I'm pretty sure you could write a PhD on a thesis on that. And I don't have the right answers, and perhaps the EU regulation, I know they're trying to regulate those things, and hopefully they'll get them right. But that's probably the biggest challenges of our current time.
And one thing that actually really stood out there was how you noted how there's advancements of technology and then the legal side and regulatory sort of catches up behind. Do you think that can ever change, or is technology just advancing so quickly that law can never actually get to a point where it's saying, okay, but before this is going to happen, I mean, that would, from your side, make the world a better place?
It would be the perfect world if law was able to catch up fast enough. But unfortunately, I don't see that ever happening. I mean, the bureaucratic process in general is just so slow. A good example is America, for instance. They still don't even have a federal law dealing with data privacy. I know there's been a lot of talks about banning TikTok and AI acts, and I'm like, but if you just enacted a federal data privacy law, broader than the CCPA, it'll actually protect a lot of, especially children's information when it comes to TikTok. Could maybe do servers that are in America. So I feel like a lot of their problems right now with data privacy and TikTok probably aren't be answered with a federal law. And I know there is one, I think it's in the Senate, but nothing's been signed yet. So there's another example of law being slow to catch up with technology.
Yeah, that's hectic. I mean, especially if you're thinking of fines and penalties and stuff for it. But from the other side, I suppose your people that really gain and benefit from it are the early founders and stuff of the different techs, because they can get in and collect all that data before stuff happens. And is there implications for those? If you are ahead of the game from a regulation side and you've collected data that you now no longer need to collect, is it a case of, okay, cool, you were ahead, it's fine, you can carry on? Or do you now need to abide by it? Or are you going to give me it depends?
No, I've got a solid answer for you. So that's where I feel like the GDPR is such an all-encompassing act. So firstly, it follows citizens around the world. It's extraterritorial, which means if you are processing EU citizens' data in Australia, for instance, GDPR completely applies then. So when it comes to processing is obviously a very broad definition of the word. And let's say I was maybe a little bit unscrupulous. I was one of those, dodgy businesses. I collected all the data. I did a lot of web scraping. I went through the whole of Facebook. I took as much data as I could. Now the GDPR came in 2018. Now, if I'm storing that data, even though I collected pre-GDPR, and GDPR is technically not retrospective, just because I'm storing it, it counts as processing under GDPR. And now I need to do something about the fact that I connected that data with not the right notifications to the data subjects, for instance, or maybe the right consent. Those are all missing. And there's many, many companies out there that are just keeping quiet, I think, right now. They're just keeping all their data. And I think, and also speaking to the fact that what's very difficult for companies is also deleting data. So not only are they storing a lot of data, but now there's a principle under the GDPR called storage limitation. So that means after a certain amount of time, when the data is no longer necessary to you, you need to think about deleting that data. And I think that scares a lot of companies. And I always tell clients that's probably one of your most difficult principles to meet is now, how do I actually delete this data? Do I need it? Do I maybe need it for litigation or health data? Sometimes you need to keep data for many years. Is it safe to delete? It's a minefield.
Yeah, and I suppose the other side from that would be analytics. Yes. You as a company having collected so much that could be invaluable to your processes, to now say, oh no, we need to wipe all of that and get rid of it. So I mean, doing practical implementations to get rid of data that's no longer data points, but can still help with analytics and be compliant. It's a conversation in itself.
Literally. I mean, one of the things you could do, because obviously you can still keep data, it's just personal information or personal data that you need to delete. But then there's a whole conversation around, okay, you could anonymize data, but you need to anonymize it to such a point that you can't ever re-identify it. So that's also tricky, because now apparently there's so many tools out there that you can re-identify data, and then you can't keep it for as long as you want. So it needs to be properly anonymized, and then you can continue to keep data. But it's an absolute challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to one of your earlier points, that privacy by design, that needs to be done at a starting point. Imagine you've now got to this point where you've got all this data, but you haven't actually built the processes. You're not going to have a choice but to delete that data in its entirety if you can't do that anonymization side, like you said.
Exactly. So, yeah, as you can tell, it's a challenge to comply with GDPR, but it's also possible.
Absolutely. And maybe just in wrapping up, a key part as well, or one of the things coming up for you soon on the radar is a webinar.
Yes.
Do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about that for a few minutes?
The webinar is being great to be happening. We're talking to a client that comes from the financial field, so obviously a very heavily regulated field. We're just going to be chatting about how to actually implement GDPR practically with your business.
Yeah. So instead of the theoretical what ifs and who's and how's, for anyone listening or keen to get involved with that, exactly like Tracy's saying, maybe a little bit more of a practical step-by-step guide, certain aspects.
Yes, and hopefully not too many it depends.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I definitely feel like I need to go back and look at all my personal data that I'm just giving to the world.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.